Within just 2 days in mid-August, the two most powerful figures in Cambodia both had to call Vietnam for help. A country that had repeatedly declared self-reliance, needing no one, now urgently turned to Vietnam amid a crisis. What made Cambodia so hasty? And why does the cycle of pleading for help, turning away, continue to repeat after decades? On August 14th, former Prime Minister Hun Sen directly contacted General Secretary To Lam. And just 1 day later, Prime Minister Hun Sen continued with a phone call to Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh. Two consecutive moves within 2 days show that Cambodia is placing high expectations on Vietnam's support amid the crisis. In form, these were exchanges to promote bilateral cooperation. But in the current socio-economic context, these phone calls reflect a different reality, a plea for support in the economy, people's livelihoods, and even domestic political stability. What is notable here does not lie in the details of the two phone calls, but in the paradox that keeps repeating. In the history of relations between the two nations, whenever Cambodia falls into crisis, it turns to Vietnam for assistance. But when the situation stabilizes, the stance of autonomy is once again emphasized. This can be seen as a cycle of dependence, a familiar political loop that has lasted for decades. It is this loop that forces Vietnam to always calculate cautiously. Because if it refuses to help, Vietnam may face security risks right on its border. But if it supports excessively, the risk of being exploited is not small, either, as Cambodia may once again turn its back when the landscape changes. And to explain why this cycle still persists, one must look directly at the crises Cambodia is facing in the current period. In recent months, Cambodia has been facing a chain of systemic challenges reflecting the fragility of the economy, and also the dependence on external relations. Hundreds of thousands of Cambodian workers expelled by Thailand have created a large-scale wave of unemployment, pushing social welfare pressure to an unprecedented level. This has heightened concerns about poverty and social instability, especially in rural areas with few job opportunities. At the same time, infrastructure and industrial projects invested by China are stalling. The reason lies not only in Beijing tightening capital, but also linked to the event of Patong Tan, a pro-Beijing political ally in Thailand, unexpectedly losing power. This was a blow to China's game in the Mekong sub-region, showing that Beijing's influence is no longer as firm as before. Domestically, Sihanoukville, once expected to become a hub for tourism and real estate, has fallen into prolonged crisis. A series of abandoned projects, a collapsed market, along with public discontent toward waves of foreign tourists and investors, has turned the once promoted new port city into a hotspot of instability. In that context, the Hun Sen government, only recently taking over power, has shown inexperience in crisis management. And when the traditional channels with Beijing no longer brought clear commitments, such as Hun Sen making 2 calls to President Xi Jinping, but still not receiving concrete assurances, Phnom Penh was forced to turn to Vietnam for support. This reflects a broader reality. Cambodia is standing at a crucial crossroads, both bound by history and interest with China, and recognizing the need to expand or rebalance relations with other partners to maintain stability in a volatile period. In such a difficult situation, Cambodia not only bears pressure in socio-economic terms, but also faces controversies from the way its leadership uses words in foreign relations. When Prime Minister Hun Sen compared his wish for Vietnam's support to the way Vietnam once helped Cuba, this statement immediately sparked controversy. The problem lies in the fact that Cuba and Cambodia have very different historical contexts. During the years of brutal war, Cuba stood by Vietnam, unconditionally sending sugar medicine experts, enduring the embargo to show solidarity. Leader Fidel Castro even declared, "For Vietnam, Cuba is ready to shed its own blood." This was proof of a strong friendship built on genuine sacrifice and never betrayed. Meanwhile, Vietnam-Cambodia relations have gone through many ups and downs, with moments of suspicion and even opposing choices. After being saved from genocide by Vietnam, Phnom Penh many times turned away, opening the door for outside powers to step in, even letting extremist anti-Vietnam movements erupt. It is this difference that makes the comparison considered by many as mismatched, even unfair to history. It not only touches on the memory of a historical period, but also highlights a paradox. A nation that many times asserted self-reliance now has to place itself in the position of seeking support. From an analytical perspective, the event shows how leaders use historical metaphors as a political tool. But when the contexts are not similar, such comparisons easily lead to strong public reactions. This raises an important question: how can countries in the region seek international support while still maintaining balance in their words, both respecting history and preserving credibility in foreign relations? From this, it can be seen that diplomacy is not only a matter of immediate interests, but also the art of language, where every small detail in a statement can shape a nation's image in the eyes of friends and partners. In the context of Cambodia turning to Hanoi for support, Vietnam chose an approach that is both flexible and firm. The message harmonized interests, shared risks, emphasized by Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh, not only carries diplomatic meaning, but also reflects the reality that Vietnam fully understands the risks when supporting a partner in difficult times. One notable point is that Vietnam did not offer unconditional commitments. Prerequisites such as ensuring the rights of Vietnamese enterprises, addressing the discrimination against people of Vietnamese origin, or ending projects that could directly affect national security show that Hanoi wants to build a relationship based on balance instead of dependence. At a deeper level, this approach can be considered a form of strategic defense. History has shown that in many periods, Cambodia has returned to relying on China after overcoming crises. Therefore, if Vietnam supports without attaching clear conditions, the risk of helping in difficulty but being abandoned when stability returns can completely repeat. From a neutral perspective, this can be seen as a wise move. It both helps Vietnam maintain its position as an important partner with Cambodia and keeps the bilateral relationship from slipping into dependence. At the same time, it also sends the message that in a region full of turmoil, cooperation can only be sustainable when there is transparency and mutual accountability from both sides. One notable aspect of the current crisis comes not only from government actions, but also from the reactions of society on both sides of the border. In Cambodia, many people asked if Vietnam is willing to help Cuba halfway across the globe. Why hesitate before the hardship of a close neighbor? This opinion stems from the anxiety and frustration of poor workers and war veterans, as they are the ones directly affected by the domestic socio-economic instabilities. On Cambodian forums, a series of contrasting images have been shared. On one side, exhausted workers crowding at the border. On the other side, lavish fundraising ceremonies in Vietnam, with banners, fresh flowers, and figures reaching tens of billions in local currency. Photos accompanied by the short caption, "Where is Brotherhood?" quickly spread, creating an effect of sympathy and outrage in the online community. Conversely, in Vietnam, netizens also reacted strongly. Many recalled historical memories that tens of thousands of Vietnamese soldiers sacrificed to help Cambodia escape the Khmer Rouge, arguing that being called ungrateful was an insult. Some common comments: how much blood was shed on Cambodian soil now all forgotten, or aid to Cuba is an act of solidarity. But helping Cambodia must come with binding conditions. History cannot repeat itself. These rebuttals attracted thousands of likes and shares, showing the special sensitivity of Vietnamese people to the word ungrateful. If viewed overall, it can be seen that public opinion in both countries arises from historical emotions, but leads to different demands. Cambodia expects immediate support, while Vietnam wants its past contributions to be recognized and remembered. It is precisely this gap that has sparked heated debate and also shows a long-term challenge in bilateral relations, how to ensure that the past is respected but not turned into a barrier for practical cooperation in the present. In the current context, one can imagine Vietnam-Cambodia relations standing before three different scenarios, each reflecting a strategic choice with long-term consequences. In the first scenario, Vietnam accepts to concede with a limited aid package. This is a temporary solution to maintain short-term stability, but it comes with risks. Cambodia may develop a dependent mindset, turning short-term assistance into a precedent that will be hard to change later. Conversely, the second scenario is that Vietnam maintains a more straightforward stance. Support will come with conditions on policies and long-term bilateral interests. This forces Cambodia to demonstrate genuine goodwill in cooperation, instead of merely calling for aid in times of difficulty. However, this approach also carries the risk of bilateral relations cracking if Cambodia refuses to comply. The third scenario, and also the greatest challenge, is Cambodia leaning entirely toward China. Beijing could well be ready to inject capital in exchange for strategic advantages, such as expanding its presence in Sihanoukville. For Vietnam, this is not only an economic issue but also a direct security challenge in the region. From these three scenarios, what can be drawn is that Vietnam-Cambodia relations are moving on a fragile balance of interests. Vietnam must consider both short-term stability and long-term strategic interests. As for Cambodia, to escape the cycle of dependence, it will have to prove independence in choosing partners instead of merely turning to where the money flows most easily. In relations between nations, friendship is often recalled as a binding factor, but in reality it only holds value when accompanied by trust and concrete actions. In other words, the past can be a foundation, but it cannot be an unlimited withdrawal card. A relationship can only be sustainable when it is built on three factors: trust, concrete action, and commitment from both sides. If one of these three pillars is missing, cooperation will easily fall into a cycle of suspicion and disappointment. The case of Cambodia is a typical example. If it wants to receive long-term support from Vietnam, similar to how Vietnam once stood by Cuba, Phnom Penh must prove it with concrete actions. This could be protecting the Vietnamese community inside the country, or more importantly, not allowing itself to become a springboard for any force to pressure its neighbors' interests. From another perspective, the Cambodian people themselves are not the cause of these recurring cycles. They are victims who directly suffer from the power game, and they must bear the consequences in the form of poverty or social discontent. This shows that the crisis does not only lie in economic factors, but also reflects the lack of sustainability in the country's political and diplomatic structure. For Vietnam, the current situation is a historic turning point. If it continues to help, Vietnam may maintain short-term stability in the region. But if such support lacks clear binding conditions, the risk of repeating the cycle of dependence will be very high. Therefore, the optimal choice does not lie in outright refusal or unconditional acceptance, but in firmly protecting long-term interests while also preserving regional stability. The key message here is once trust is lost, every plea for help becomes only a formality. For Vietnam, supporting its neighbor in times of hardship is necessary, but it must never forget the top priority: protecting strategic security and national interests in the long run. So, in your view, which path will help Cambodia escape the cycle of dependence? Economic self-reliance, adjusting foreign relations to balance among major powers, or the ability to build sustainable trust with its closest neighbor? Or does reality require all these elements to converge in order to form a stable and long-lasting foundation? Please share your perspective in the comments. If you find this analysis helpful, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell to continue following in-depth content on regional and global politics and economics. Thank you for staying until the end of the video.